So what role should a government play in an economy? There you go. So those of you had me American history, those who have me now, you can talk about how government maybe increased its role during the time of the Great Depression. Maybe during certain periods of time, maybe after conflict, before a conflict, through a recession or a depression, government might increase its role. So maybe use that as an example when you're answering this bell ring. Autumn current event for Friday. Nice. Your favorite, right? Oh, yeah. All right, so what do we got here? What role should government play in an economy? Rooster, what do you have?
I said the government should see and make sure to set policies and laws. Inflation doesn't go up or secure the countries.
Okay, good, good. What else do you have to add? Or is that it?
That's kind of it.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought you were going on and I cut you off, but yeah, good job. So you're saying the government maybe should have somewhat of an eye on the economy, making sure that the inflation rates don't rise too high and making sure that the economy can run stable, like on its own, right? Okay, good. 40, what about you?
Pretty much other things that you said. I said, like, they also help with public good services and maintain that stuff.
Good. Yeah. So making it affordable for all Americans to try to make sure that their standard of living is high. Okay, good. Good. What about you, Autumn? Okay. All right, good. So providing national defense, so maybe through taxation. So you're saying maybe higher taxes on certain items or goods to make sure that we can afford these public services? Okay. Connor, what about you?
Just to keep everything stable.
All right. Nice, nice. But for the most part, you're saying more like a hands-off approach. Okay. All right. Good, good. All right. So again, there's many opinions about what the government should be and how it should be when it comes to regulating the economy. And I mean, you can really look at it through American history. During these times of need, like the Great Depression, government is a little bit more involved, right? They're creating more government agencies and jobs and making sure that the market's running smooth and applying a little bit more progressive movements for these people that are struggling through hardships. And let's just say during good times. So post World War II, moving throughout the 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s, you can describe that the government maybe is a little bit more hands off and that the private sector is just kind of doing it and taking its role and that the government should stay out of it because we see more innovation. We see more profit. We see a higher standard of living when the government's maybe out of the economy. Right? In the 1920s, a good example, right after World War One. And I mean, there's a lot of decisions to make about that, right? There's many different opinions on what role government should have in the economy. And today we'll talk about certain theories and policies of the economy and how maybe government should, or maybe do, or maybe don't have an increased role in the workings of the economy. But everybody's all on the same page here, which I thought was interesting. He said that maybe government should have somewhat of an influence, even if it's small, right? Like you were saying, controlling interest rates and making sure that inflation doesn't become too high. And a lot of people agreed that maybe it's good that the government should stay out of the workings of the economy. And there's a lot of truth to that too, right? And I guess it depends on the certain events that are going on in the world, especially in the United States. And maybe if we're in part of a conflict or going through a recession, like 2008, the housing recession, or you can say maybe like obviously the Great Depression in the 1930s, and how government maybe should have an increased role. All right, good. So here are your terms for today. So we got communism, capitalism, socialism, mixed market economy, SEZs. What? Special economic zones. There you go. There you go. All right, real quick. So we're going to talk about some of these policies, these theories, these ideas of the economic systems. But real quick, what are SEZs, special economic zones? What does that mean? And where can you maybe find them? Connor, what do you have for SEZs?
Area subject to different regulation and administration
From where?
from the host country.
Okay, so what does that mean then? What do you think? Anybody else have a definition here? SEZs. Go ahead.
I have special economics. It's an area which business and trade
Good job. Good job. So let's say in a communist country, okay, in China in particular, there's a lot of SEZs, especially in Hong Kong. Okay, so SEZs is a way that, let's say, a communist country can accept capitalist ideas and help with obviously money flow, with entrepreneurship, with private business, and to help their economy industrialize and become more modern. So China is a good example of a communist country that has these SEZs located within their economic system. So does that mean China is truly communistic? No, they're not. Meaning that they do have land area, places where they have free trade, private business, and that they can trade with these democratic countries, these capitalist countries. And that's just a good example of what an SEZ is. Although China is mostly communistic, okay, a lot of the government makes the decisions on pretty much everything. These SEZs, these special economic zones located in Hong Kong, especially, this is where private business can flourish. This is where capitalism can take hold. And this is kind of how China stays really up to date with new policies, with new really innovations in their marketplace. Without these SEZs, chances are China would falter. They would not have trade with the United States. They would not have trade with really these other democratic countries, these European countries around the world. We know that China has a big production, right? Obviously, they make a lot of products. But without these SEZs, chances are their economy would falter. It would fall apart. Does that make sense? So that's what that means by special economic zones, that they have openings, places where they accept capitalism and free market and private business. All right, real quick. So economics is a social science that analyzes the production, distribution, and consumption of goods. So supply and demand, realizing and understanding what prices are depending on that supply and demand. So it's important to talk about economics because this really shaped our world, our modern world. Okay, after after World War II, we faced a Cold War, and many people argue that this was capitalism versus communism, and how the United States was trying to spread its influence and establish free trade around the world, and to grow many of these countries into more modern societies through private business, entrepreneurship, and with that you get innovation, you get modernization. In these communist countries, you really don't see that. Okay, within these communist countries, it's all controlled by the government. They set the wages, they set the prices, they really set the means of production. So, do you think you're going to get new innovative products from a communist country? Do you think they're going to really set the prices to a level where this will increase the standard of living for many people living in that area, that country? No. And that's one thing with a capitalist economy that we see. Okay, a lot of these businesses are competing against one another. They're trying to look for quality of goods and at the same time quantity, and trying to make sure, making sure that the market is kind of regulated by itself. And through this competition, we see prices drop. We see prices at a point where many people can afford these new luxury style items, and it's the best of the best. All right, so role of the economic systems. So many major decisions have to play a role. Here are the three. So what and how much should be produced? So again, depending on demand, depending on price, right? So if we're in a high demand for a certain product, like let's say at the start of the pandemic, it was ventilators. Many of the businesses in the United States actually adapted their production to actually produce ventilators, which is interesting enough. And that's how really the United States can combat against a lot of conflicts, during World War II, right? Ford stopped, well, they didn't stop producing automobiles, but they helped with producing airplanes. So manufacturing airplanes and different types of war materials for the war effort. And because of our economy, because of our production, we can adjust our products and our production really just at the snap of a finger. Obviously, there's incentives by the government, but for the most part, our economy shifted towards constant innovation, constant modernization because of this capitalist form of economy. Two, how goods and services should be produced. All right. So depending on supply, depending on demand. And Connor, we talked about this already with the depression, right? If you keep adding to that supply, prices are going to drop so low. Can you afford, let's say, a loan that you maybe took out from the bank? No, right? So if you keep saturating the economy, chances are you might go through somewhat of a recession. Your business might shut down because you're producing more goods than actually intake you're getting from profits. So again, there needs to be some sort of regulation. There needs to be some sort of limit of how much you can produce and obviously take in. So who gets the goods and services that are produced? So trade, right? There's many cases where trade could be prevented. Let's say we're going through a trade war with another country. Maybe let's say we are not doing trade with communist countries. And like I said with China, these SEZs, okay, it's important that China has these SEZs. If not, they're not seeing the new innovations. They're not seeing the modernization. They're not getting trade that will stimulate their economy and continue to allow them to rise as a world power. So it's important to know these factors when it comes to economic decisions. So here's a map of 2020 of really the GDP, which means growth domestic product. So what is being produced and really depending on how our economy is looking and how it's shaped compared to other countries. So the profits being made. And in many ways, this is just showing how prosperous a country is. So as you can see, the United States is the darkest blue you can get. Okay, we're still the strongest economy in the world. Even though we're going through somewhat of a slump with supply chain issues, we're still, our GDP is the highest in the world. There's other countries that are close, like Germany. Okay, obviously they're a strong economy. Australia is strong, Great Britain, right? Many of these Western European countries, because they have a capitalist form of economy. In some cases, we'll talk about it, they're a mixed market society. I thought this one was interesting, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is darker blue and has a stronger GDP than China. Why do you think? Why do you think? Remember, we talked about Saudi Arabia. They have a constitutional monarchy, right? Or is an absolute monarchy? Pretty wild stuff, right? I remember we talked about these types of government. It's a form of absolute monarchy, but why do you think Saudi Arabia has a stronger GDP per capita than China? Go ahead, Connor. Their oil, yep, their oil production, plain and simple, right? Obviously, fuel is essential, and it's something that powers our manufacturing, powers our industries. So I thought that was interesting to look at this map with GDP and how this kind of looks across the world. Venezuela, right here, it's white. It really has no data because they just turned into a communist country probably around the 90s, early 2000s, 80s. And they've been really, really struggling. It was to a point where they're actually a capitalist economy throughout or after World War II, and they were prospering pretty heavy. But once they shifted to communism, it really took a toll. It really tanked hard. But China, like I mentioned, they have these special economic zones which allow them to keep modern, stay innovative, and have a high GDP. All right, I thought that was an interesting show. All right, first one I want to talk about, these economic systems, is capitalism. So an economic system in which factories, equipment, and other means of production are privately owned rather than controlled by the government. And again, this is what helps us stay innovative. As these corporations, these companies are all looking for the best measures of production and helping produce as much goods as possible, this is helping the standard of living in that country. If people have more options, if people have companies literally going toe to toe and competing against one another with means of production, of efficiency, and with quantity, this is overall going to benefit society. because people can afford these products pretty easily, right? When it comes to cars, when it comes to, let's say, other products like televisions, whatever it might be. Okay, with these companies going toe to toe and competing against one another, chances are this is going to be more affordable for people. And that's why capitalism is so strong. Okay, we see many innovations and expansion of capitalism all across the world. And that's really because of the profitability and that people can afford these goods no problem. What's one drawback, though, to capitalism? So these private organizations, right now, especially big tech's kind of being washed upon, and there might be some sort of government regulation on big tech, like Facebook, like Twitter, different companies like that. What do you think? Go ahead, Connor. Yeah, right. The government really can't tell them who they can maybe sell their goods and services to, right? So right now, Google, Microsoft, Apple, Nike, okay, a lot of these huge corporations, a lot of times are being, I wouldn't say paid off, but they're kind of working with other countries to a point like, let's say with cell phones, Apple and Google, where a lot of our systems are ran off of in the United States, if they're in, I wouldn't say in bed with another country like China, okay, who is a huge rival of the United States, this could be very detrimental, right? This could cause many issues to our society. And this is dangerous. And that's why many people are saying that government maybe should step up and try to regulate some of these big tech corporations. It has to be somewhat of a balance, right? It has to be some sort of a regulation, but at the same time, allowing these companies to do what they want. Back in the start of World War II, many of these oil and gas companies in the United States, guess where they're sending a lot of their fuel supplies to? Adolf Hitler, the Nazis, and to Germany. And this was something that was alarming to the government. It's like, hey, we're supporting, this not so great country over in Europe that is doing a lot of terrible things and expanding their country and really taking over some of these democratic nations. Maybe we should stop this, right? So there's a lot of question marks about capitalism, but for the most part, when it's ran effectively here in the United States, we see a higher standard of living and people enjoying obviously these luxuries, these supplies, these products. So example, United States of America. So real quick, all I think I'm going to get through is capitalism. I'm just going to finish these up tomorrow then, I guess. But laissez-faire economics means it's a hands-off approach. Government staying out of the workings of the economy, and that it's going to kind of regulate itself. So if government steps up and regulates it, if their hands are involved in the economy, chances are this is going to make things a little bit more difficult for innovation, for modernization, for really a standard of living for all Americans and all people. So laissez-faire is just meaning that the economy will adjust itself, that private business will run the economy for its benefit. And for the most part, in the 1920s, 1950s, really after the Cold War in the 1990s, even in moving into the 2000s, we've seen the most prosperous times when the government stays out of the economy and then it kind of regulates itself. But like I mentioned, maybe the government should step up in certain times of despair, like the Great Depression or a recession somewhat. And throughout the 1920s, we see these market tycoons, these capitalist tycoons take hold, like Rockefeller, okay, like Andrew Carnegie. And many people critique that because of capitalism and there's no government regulation, you see these wealthy elite people kind of controlling almost 99% of the cash flow in the United States. They control really a lot of the production in the US. And there's a lot of truth to that. That's why we see the progressive era, right? Remember talking about that, Connor? Yeah. So again, capitalism. Here are just some companies, like I said, with Standard Oil, Carnegie Steel, and how that kind of works. Last thing here, supply and demand. So the biggest thing is supply and demand. Once we have high supply of a product, what happens to the price? If we have a large supply, what happens to the price? Go ahead, Connor. It goes down. Good job. And if we have a low supply of products, what happens to the price? It goes up. All right, well, how does demand play a role in this? How does demand play a role in this? So if there's a high demand of a product, what happens to the price? Connor? No. So if you're demanding a product, if you're demanding a good, chances it will boost supply eventually, right? Until the economy work its way to producing more of that good. But if you're demanding of a product or a good, yeah, it's going to be more expensive, right? The market's going to say, well, if there's such of a low supply, that means the demand's high for that product. So the price is going to work in that favor. If there's a low demand for a product, let's say many people just don't want to purchase that product or good, what happens to the price? It drops. So that's why you see demand and price work hand in hand. So if there's a high demand, higher the price. Low demand, lower the price. And supply obviously works vice versa from the price. Okay, we'll talk about socialism and communism tomorrow. I kind of ran out of time. I apologize. And then I'll have that assignment for you of these economic theories. Okay, any questions? Okay, that's all I got for today.